thank you, Erin, for coming to these new episodes of Mother Tales. I must say that I feel so grateful that you are here because I know that this is the episode where I will learn a lot, and I'm grateful for you to share your knowledge, wisdom, with me and with who is going to watch this episode. So I will pass the mic to you to introduce yourself and to share with us a little bit about you. And then if you are ready, we can dive into the questions that I have for you.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you and doing this. So yeah, I'm Erin, and I am a lot of things. As you can see, I'm a fiber artist behind me. I do a lot of fiber art. I do digital art. I'm a writer. I have an MDiv in spiritual care and counseling, and I've had a lot of experience in my life in supporting people in medical crisis, in health crisis, and also traversing that myself. I'm disabled. I am genderqueer. I'm a parent of a genderqueer child. I'm a neurodiverse human, parent to neurodiverse humans as well. Divergent humans, sorry. I am a neurodivergent human in a neurodiverse family. And I'm also a childhood cancer survivor, and I'm a parent to a childhood cancer survivor. We live with physical disabilities as well as other disabilities, mental health impacts, and of course, being neurodivergent, sometimes some people experience those as disabilities as well. And there are times where I experience the disability aspect of my neurodivergent state, and other times where that's less prevalent for me. So I feel like I live in a way that really is on the liminal edges. And I've really learned about what it means to support people in the liminal edges of society. I've done a lot of work in supporting people in their healing processes. I do multiple different types of alternative care. I do, spiritual counseling type things. I also do EFT tapping. I do energy work. I do energy healing. I work with all the things like crystals and aromatherapy, and I do therapeutic arts to support people in their healing journey. So I'm really interested in how we can expand our understanding of healing, and how we can expand our understanding of what is healing, what is wholeness, what is health, and really helping people understand how to find an integrated experience of health. Because as a childhood cancer survivor and a parent of a childhood cancer survivor, I've also had a lot of experience with the conventional medical system and see a lot of benefit in that as well. So and a lot of challenge. So it feels like a life path that I've been on to really feel into how I can integrate the many aspects of my life and the many different ways that I've been shown that I need to stretch and grow to expand my own understanding of myself, of the world that I live in, and find ways to talk about the places where I see us not making a lot of room for those of us who have a different experience of the world, and where society itself can maybe do some shifting and changing and growing to become a little bit more inclusive of who's on those liminal edges, and how do we make space for those voices, and how do we make space for those experiences as we move through the world. And through all of us are on our own healing journeys, right? It looks different dependent on who we are and what our stories are, but we're all on our own healing journeys. So how do we make spaces for all the different kinds of voices and different kinds of experiences while in that process of healing as humans? Because we're all in that in some context. So
Yeah. Wow, thank you. And yeah. Well, amazing. Thank you. And in fact, when you said that, you said many important things that I would like to actually ask you the first question about. I changed my mind. I wanted to ask you about inclusion, but I would like to ask you first about, you talked about um, that you also had experience with this, with the medical system, and you offer lots of alternative healings modality, and you see the benefit of the system to the health system too. And I would love to ask you, because as you know, I'm a midwife, and many like I transformed a lot, and many times I had rage against the medical system. Many times I was triggered working in the medical system. Many times I'm triggered because I receive women that share with me their experience that is traumatic or different kind of experiences. And I also see the benefits sometimes. And so I would love to ask you, how do you navigate all that for a person that uh, doesn't have disability, or also a person who does have and has more challenges to navigate that? Um, so yeah, even knowing your experience, what maybe maternity is different, or but maybe it's the same comparing with other experience in the health world. I don't know. What do you say about that?
Well, it's interesting because I think it all intersects. I think it's intersectional. I know that my experience as a childhood cancer survivor was deeply impacted my experience of giving birth to my children, because the medical system was freaked out about how many side effects and long-term side effects I had from childhood cancer when I went to birth. And I had midwives for both my births, but I wasn't allowed to have the home birth that I wanted to have. And I wasn't allowed to have the non-medicalized birth that I was really interested in having, because the concern for my own like heart health and my own body, and what could my body handle, and would we be setting me up for a bigger emergency. And I have a lot of feelings about that, and there's a big story, and I could tell some pretty intense stories about birthing in that medical system. But I think that when I look at the medical system, I have a lot of medical trauma. I actually have PTSD and CPTSD from my experiences of childhood cancer and my subsequent years. So one thing that a lot of people, for those of you who are listening who don't know about childhood cancer, I describe it as a chronic illness, because there's an acute phase for childhood cancer where you have cancer and you're treated for the cancer itself. But the treatment causes disability and long-term side effects. And you never actually leave the childhood cancer world, because there's only 4 drugs. There's over 200 types of childhood cancer, and there's only 4 drugs that are specifically designed for children's growing bodies. So most of the treatments that kids are getting are adult treatments at volumes and frequencies that are not actually approved for adults. So their kids are getting more than adults are getting of chemotherapy and different treatments than that. And they're getting them more frequently. And those impacts have a much different effect on a growing body. So what we see is, over the next decades of life, even after the cancer is over, the treatment has caused multiple side effects and disabilities. And that child has gone through massive trauma on a continual basis. So like, for example, me and my child both had leukemia. That's 2 or 3 years of treatment every day, chemo every day for over 2 to 3 years, and multiple different kinds of treatments, multiple different types of really intensive drugs. That's a lot of trauma. That's a lot of over time. That's a lot of experiences that are not necessarily easy to move through. And then we are required to keep entering the medical system for the follow-up care that we need. So the reason I say all that is because there's a lot of navigating a system that has actually harmed us and saved our lives. So we're holding both right? We had our lives saved, but the saving of it actually disabled our bodies, or is potentially, sometimes disability doesn't show up for 30 years, but can be traced back to that original treatment when it does show up. So it can be multiple years, decades of follow-up, and then finding that there's this brand new massive thing that's impacting life, and it can be traced back to that original treatment. And so what it means is that we really have to do a lot of deep work around how do we keep showing up, even when we're triggered, when we're in pain, when we're scared, when we're having a panic response or an anxiety response. And that's where, for me, alternative medicine has come in over and over again. So I use energy healing. I carry stones in my pockets. I use aromatherapy. I use meditation. I use EFT tapping. I do all sorts of other modalities so that I can support the healing that I'm receiving in the conventional medical system, because there are things that the conventional medical system does very well that alternative medicine hasn't quite figured out how to dial in the same way. And so how do I keep showing up for those things and staying present? And the present part is one of the most challenging pieces, because it really means that we have to keep doing the deep internal emotional work that's involved with the places where we can see that the conventional medical system is out of balance, that we can see that the truth is the medical system is made up of a lot of individuals, right? It's not, there is a system, but there's a lot of individuals in it who are making it up. And most of those individuals come in with the best of intentions. They come in because they want to help people. They want to be present with people, but it's done in a way, in a system that also harms them. So you're working with people who are also living and working in a place that is ultimately over time traumatizing for them. And I think that one of those things that for me has come back again and again is, if I can show up and remember the humanness of the people that I'm working with, and I can remember their own emotional state, if I can remember to stay present with their human nature and my human nature, and I can be as honest as possible and as deeply connected to them as a human as possible, then I can stay more present with the experience. And then I have to still go away and do some of my own emotional care afterwards. There's always, in our house, we have a hospital hangover, or any kind of medical hangover. We plan now for a hangover day or period of time after anything that happens, so that we can come back to our center, because there's always a recentering that we need to do afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes,
but
it answered. Okay. I feel that I can also learn from this. And when in my job, in my context, and with holding space for the others, for women, people, families that navigate the system, and when they come back home, I feel like sometimes I'm that person that holds space, or help them to hold space for themselves, from the feeling for what comes up. And I see the balance between the two. I see that there are some people like me, you, other people, that I feel like we are the bridge between the two, and that we need that. We need that to maybe include everyone, to not feel rage and triggered all the time, because I feel that if I'm in the completely radical side of no, not the system, no, absolutely not, I'm always in that state of rage and triggered. And I don't know if I explain what I meant, but I feel like really we need both, and we need to be that bridge that can restore the balance rather than always be in the opposite side of and having that strong emotion that I don't feel it's healthy to have that trigger the rage.
Absolutely. I think that the balance is the necessary place that we need to move, because we're not going to get rid of the conventional medical system. And we don't actually really want to. There are a lot of people, a lot of suffering that would happen. I would be dead many times over if it weren't for the conventional medical system. My children would be dead many times over if it weren't for the conventional medical system. That system itself has so much use and value. And also, it can't exist as it's the only thing any longer. So, like, for example, one of the things that we did, we would invite in the alternative way of being into our own conventional medical system treatments. So, like, my son's final chemo treatment after 3 years, I brought my sacred rocks and I made an altar in his room as a gratitude for this journey that we had been on. There was an altar set up in the chemo room, and the nurses and doctors were coming in and kind of like looking at it, and I was like, yeah, this is our altar. And okay, I can't have candles because that's not like safe in a hospital setting, but I have my sacred rocks and I have my other things that are important. And we brought a cake to celebrate the end of treatment. We brought in our own experience, our own flavor, to really make it our own. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to think about, is how do we show up and stay in our grounding of who we are and what's important to us when we're in that system that wants to impose its way of being onto us. So we can be in our own way of being without pushing it away completely. We can say, yes, this chemotherapy, this very toxic drug that is very difficult for our bodies to handle, which is very like impactful long term and is necessary. That's part of this. But the other part of it is, here's this sacred aspect, and I'm going to hold the sacred aspect. I'm going to be the one in charge of holding that right now. And I'm going to show up with it, and I'm going to care for it, because this is what helps me stay present and stay present with my heart and my spirit as I'm moving through this process. Because we can't, I agree with you. If we I have gone through periods in my life where I've been so angry at the impact that chemo did to my body. I used to, when I was a teenager, I would say to my parents, like, I think you should have just let me die. And I mean, saying that to a parent, now having been a parent who's had to give permission to give my child chemotherapy, that's a terrible thing to have to hear as a parent. It was, I can look back now and see how deeply harmful that was. And at the time I couldn't see it because I was so caught up in my own anger, and I hadn't done the emotional work of really looking at what was it that made me feel disconnected from myself, and what's the healing that I need. The medical system is not going to give me every level of healing that I need. The medical system is one level of healing. Going to the conventional medical system and assuming that they are going to offer all the levels of healing is like going to a chiropractor and being angry because they didn't look at your teeth and tell you had cavities. And you're like, it's not. The medical system is one kind of healing. So we need to let them have that level of healing, and then we need to figure out how to invite the other pieces that feel important to us into it.
And also that means taking responsibility for ourselves. It's not that I delegate completely to one system or to a specialist or to, I don't know, healer. We also have our own responsibility towards ourselves to do our work, and then have our helpers that we choose which one we want to have. So what's that? I hope that links well with this question about health privilege, because I know you talk a lot. And is it correct to say that you are an advocate as well of, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I would love to talk more about maybe through examples or about your experience with health privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people don't know exactly what that is. It's kind of a new term. It can feel confusing. There's a lot of terms with the word privilege attached to it that are around now, and that can feel a little bit, I think it also feels triggering sometimes, especially for those of us who have privilege and feel like, oh gosh, now there's another thing that I need to try and figure out how to pay attention to, and I don't know enough about, so maybe I'm doing harm. And there's a lot around that. So health privilege as a basic, I'd heard people talk about ableism. There's a lot of conversation about like ableism, and that's the experience of people who assume that everyone is able-bodied or has the same privilege to do things. But one of the things that I realized is ableism doesn't talk about as much about the experience of health. It talks about disability. So, of course, as someone with disabilities, I also have my own experience of ableism in the world, but it doesn't talk about health privilege. And health privilege really looks at where are we assuming everyone has the same experience. It's based in a concept of healthism, which was created. The term healthism came from, oh, I'm forgetting his name, Robert Crawford in the 1980s. And he developed this term healthism is kind of this idea that we are completely and totally able to control our own health, and health as a completely individual thing. Because what healthism talks about is health is not entirely individual. There's a societal impact on health. There's societal experiences of health. We are not in total control of our health. We can make choices, we can do things to support health, but to say that every person is completely in control of their own health means that anybody who isn't healthy has chosen that in some way. And that's an incredibly damaging thing to tell someone who, especially like if you look at it from my perspective, we can kind of, because it's so deeply embedded in our culture, we can kind of explain how this is true for adults pretty often. But when you look at a child and you say, how did that 3-year-old cause their own cancer? By the choices that they made. The idea of healthism really starts to come into focus. Like, oh, well, what we're going to do as a society is we're going to start blaming the mother, right? We're going to start saying, well, it's probably the mother's choices that she's making that she has now caused her kids cancer. Well, what if actually what caused the child's cancer is the presence of nuclear plant nearby, or the pollution in the water, and or the impact of I could come up with so many different things. What my point is what if that's not their doing? And so what if health isn't actually entirely individual? What if health is a societal thing? What if all of us are responsible in some way for a collective state of health? And if the systems that we live within create or impact our ability to be healthy, what that means when you start looking at it is then some of us have more privilege to be in a state of health than other people do. Some of us are deeply impacted by things that are not in our control. And we don't have those same privileges to maintain or gain that same state of health that others do. So health privilege comes to this question of, do you have the privilege of always believing that you are going to be healthy, that your health is in your control? Do you always trust that your immune system is going to be enough to respond to any sort of illness? if you don't have that, that's not, if you can't or trust that your immune system is going to have an adequate response, that's not your fault. That's actually a lack of privilege that you have in that area. And so when we look at what does that mean societally, it means that there are people in our society who don't have the same privilege of health that other people do. And we as a society then have a responsibility to see how we can help support those people who have less privilege in their state of health. They have more risk, or they have more things that are challenging for them. All of those things, we have more responsibility as a society to support them, instead of either shaming them with healthism. This is somehow your fault. This is something that you've done. This is a choice you've made. Or pushing them to the side so that they're not as visible, and saying, I'm going to make the choices that I'm going to make because these feel like the good, comfortable choices for me. I would rather make these choices, and those people can fend for themselves. Well, what you're saying is those people with less privilege are on their own. And that means that there's never a place where we can actually join together and collectively change the state of health that's available to all of us. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes. And also when you talk, it feels like, actually, I don't know if this is negative, or maybe you can give me your experience, but it feels like that in our society, there is more individualism, that actually let's talk and think about how can we help each other, because there are so many, in many countries. I've been in Africa, and this happens where, people either don't have access or can't have access, or they don't have drugs, or they don't have whatever it is, and they can't choose. But not even going to Africa, everywhere in the world we can find these examples. But I feel that we have an individualistic approach rather than a collective approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the hyper individualism that we have in our culture is one of those things that deeply impacts those with less health privilege.
Just I love for people to know that in the meantime, I changed country. I'm in a different space.
Totally.
Different day.
It's like MySpace has been completely transformed. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know where to start. I think maybe we can wrap up the conversation about health privilege. I would love to ask you, what do you think, what's important to know for people about health privilege? I guess for everyone it's important to be aware, but for example, for professionals like me, or for people that work in the health industry, in different alternative and hospital system, what's important to know about health privilege? What do you think is important?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really important for anyone in the health industry or a professional working in the wellness industry is to understand that health privilege is one of the only privileges out there that's mutable, that's changeable. So we can be born with privilege. We can lose privilege in a day, and that can affect us for the rest of our lives, or sometimes it affects us for a period of time and then we gain some of our health privilege back. It's a changeable privilege. And so we're always in a state of learning about what that means in our lives. And there's always a state of grieving that's happening for the person who's trying to navigate health privilege. And a lot of people don't even realize they had it until it's gone. And then they're trying to come to terms with how it's left their life and the implications of what that means in their life. And usually when you've lost health privilege, you don't have enough energy or spoons. In the disability community, there's the spoon theory, right? I don't have the spoons for that. there's not enough spoons to really dive into the advocacy that one might need, or really dive into understanding how this is impacting our life. We just live it, and we're in that constant, it's a state of grief often, and a state of mourning, and a state of really, there's a state of transformation, but it's usually a very uncomfortable transformation that someone is in. So when you're living or working with someone who has less health privilege, it's really important to understand that that health privilege may be the loss of health privilege may be a brand new experience for them, or they might be old hats at this. They might have been navigating not having health privilege now for the majority of their life, and not assuming their privilege, not assuming they may also be at a different point of advocacy, right? If they've had a life of not having a lot of health privilege, they've also had to learn about how to advocate for themselves. And likely within the medical system and within the wellness community, they've had a lot of people telling them what they needed to do instead of asking them what they need in that moment. Yeah. So there's a level of needing to be able to dance with someone a little bit in a like very gentle and honoring way. It's not like, I think that a lot of wellness or health professionals come in feeling like they need to be an authority, they need to be reassuring, they need to be able to make sure that the person doesn't feel scared, and scared is actually pretty normal. And to say you can't feel scared, or you can't feel grief or anxiety or sadness or any of these things as you're looking at the ways in which your life has been massively transformed or impacted by the lack of health privilege is gaslighting. It's bypassing their experience. So really allowing someone to be in their experience is an important part of acknowledging their health privilege or the lack thereof. And not just like, that doesn't mean letting someone like abuse you as a health professional. It doesn't mean letting someone like go off the rails, but making a safe space and really making time to hear them, to listen, to trust them, to trust their experience of their body, to trust their experience of what they're telling you, and understanding. I think the biggest part for me that I've come back with over time, over and over again, is we need to be co-creators of our health together. There needs to be like, I'm coming to this to create what I understand is health for me, which may be something completely different than what health is for you. So I have my own priorities, and I'm ready to come to you as a professional who knows maybe something more than I do, but I'm not coming to it as someone who knows nothing. I'm coming to it with lived experience. I'm coming to it possibly with research that I've done. I'm coming to it with a level of knowing in myself that I need to have honored in order to be able to honor the knowing that you have, because both are important. You're the professionally trained individual. I don't have the training you have. I want access to the understanding that you have. I want to be able to access your wisdom. I want to be able to access your knowing. But in order to do that, I need to know that you also see and honor me and my experience.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah. Can I give an example? When you were talking, I was thinking about when I was working as a consultant midwife for some maternity project in Africa. Most of the time, the approach that was used was, okay, we go there and we build this infrastructure, we build this maternity hospital, we build this clinic, not only maternity, but other health services, without involving the community and asking, but actually, what do you need? Because that is my opinion on how I think they should live, they should experience the health system. Or thinking, sorry, that this is what they need. And actually, there was never the approach that we used. And then I've learned that it wasn't used, like it wasn't, people were not, sorry, maybe I will need water soon. The people were not using the services that we were building. And so that made me think, oh, maybe we are not fulfilling actually the needs, what they need. And we started changing strategy and asking the community, what do you need? What do your women need? What the villagers need? What the men need? And like implementing what they need in a different way, rather than me going, I'm professional, I know what you need, you are suffering because of that, then I'll give you that. And then actually it wasn't what they needed. So it's meeting both sides. And yeah, so I don't know if it fits with what you were describing, but that was the visual that I was getting when you were describing the, you know, listening to the need of both, and to the experience training, but also the actually what the person needs. And also that considering that everyone is different and everyone has a different need.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a really brilliant example, because I think the other piece of really making space to hear what the needs are is really looking at what are the, I hesitate, I even hesitated as it was going to come out of my mouth, but I'm going to say it. What are the prejudices or the beliefs that we bring to the situation as a medical professional, as a wellness practitioner, about this person and their experience in the world, about what we think is right and true and good for them? What are those? Those are embedded understandings of often ableism, often healthism. There's often a belief that like this person must not be doing the right things for themselves if they're experiencing this health issue, right? A lot of our health care is set up with the idea of this basis of healthism, which is like wellness is required, the individual is responsible for their health, right? The individual person is really required to fully take charge of their health. And if they are struggling with health in any way, shape, or form, it's because they in some way are failing to meet their own needs, right? And a lot of medical and health professionals, wellness professionals, come to the situation believing that to be true. And when that happens, what you're automatically doing is saying, I'm coming in judging where you are, how you have created this for yourself, and I'm going to be your savior, right?
Yeah.
And that creates a really unhealthy imbalance between the practitioner and the individual, in that then that individual already has to come in defending themselves, already has to come in and say, I didn't cause this, right? We have to understand that health is not an individual experience. Health is within a societal context. Health is within a very unwell society. We cannot talk about our own well-being and our own health if we are not taking into account what the societal impacts are, or the cultural requirements, and what we understand health to be, right? Mm-hmm. There are some places that would say that what you're doing there, that doesn't look healthy to me. That's not my understanding, my cultural understanding of health. And if we come in and we say, this is what health is, then we're discounting their lived experience. So the lived experience is really such a huge part, and understanding our own prejudices, our own embedded, prejudice, I hesitated to use that word because I think that a lot of people feel defensive when they hear the word prejudice. They feel like they've done something wrong, right? Like, I'm bad because I have a prejudice. But the truth is that we are born and raised in a society that teaches us how the world works on every level, right? We are born and raised in a world that says, this is the way this is the way this is how we think about these things. And most of our prejudices are, and I have like internalized ableism, internalized healthism, all of those things, they aren't things that I chose to take on. They were things that were put into my mind and my understanding by the society I live in. And where my responsibility comes up is when I see that playing out, I now have a responsibility. When I become aware of it, I have a responsibility to say, how do I decondition this? How do I unravel this so that it stops doing harm to other people? I see now that I have, even this morning, I was in a conversation and I was like, oh man, the way that I'm interacting in this situation, that's my own internalized ableism. I'm actually harming another person with my own internalized ableism. I really need to, now it's on me, it's my unpacking to take that back and say, okay, that's a belief that I'm not going to shame myself for having that belief, but now it's my responsibility to unpack it. And I think the really hard part of it, and this is, I think, another societal systemic issue, is that so many health wellness practitioners are so overloaded at this point. They have too many people in their case. They don't have enough time for their own self-care. They don't have enough support themselves. That deconditioning work, that unraveling of those beliefs it's necessarily pushed to the wayside because they're just busy surviving while offering care to others. So we need it's not just on the individual healthcare practitioner to do their own work, though they do need to do their own work. There's also a requirement on a societal level of how do we create a more healthy environment for our healthcare and our wellness practitioners that allows them to step out of this healthism sort of dynamic where they feel like if they are struggling, it's because they're doing something wrong. They also are impacted by this belief and it's impacting their care. So we have a societal requirement to unpack some of this and create systems and structures to support our wellness practitioners, support our carers. And we're really seeing that kind of across the board post-pandemic is like our doctors, our nurses, our EMTs, our healthcare professionals in every place are burnt out and they don't have safety nets to catch them. And yet here we are as people who have less privilege, people who are experiencing trauma, because that's what requiring healthcare usually incorporates a level of trauma. So here's someone in an active state of trauma of some kind, requiring more of their healthcare professional, and their healthcare professional has less resources than they ever have and more demands on them. And it's a dynamic that's causing massive breakdown on both sides, right? We're getting more and more frustrated and angry as people who need care because we're not getting the care we need, but we're getting more and more frustrated as well as carers, as healthcare support people, because we're not getting the support we need. And what we need to understand is that we're actually in it together. We're all in it together. We all have a mutable health privilege. We all may wake up tomorrow and have a different experience of health than we did the day before. There are some people who have been journeying this path longer than others, but no matter who it is, everybody is going to be impacted by health privilege at some point in their life. And if we continue to not care about it until it's us who has less privilege, we're going to end up in the same sort of cyclical thing that we're in. So we need the people who currently have health privilege, whoever they are, I wouldn't actually say necessarily that they're healthcare professionals all the time. I think healthcare professionals often are lacking health privilege because they don't have the supports they need and they're running on burnout. I think it's the people who have the most privilege right now, the health privilege, that need to step forward and help create systems and structures that support all of those people who are in places of lack so that we can come and meet each other in a more balanced state.
Yeah, thank you for this reflection. I think it's really super important. And because I can see when you were talking, I can see also there is like in the discussions regarding maternity services, this cycle, no, that also I'm blaming you do that, you need to change the health system, who work independently, oh, this is not work, like all this, rather than meeting lots of blaming, this is not, that hospital is not doing well, the other one, that professional is not good enough. And I always ask myself, I always reflect about that this doesn't serve us, all this blaming and pointing fingers. But as you were saying, you know, we need to find a way to meet each other because we are all in the same boat at the end. And yeah, so it's really important to have, and I guess also have more discussions in the health system, and again including everyone, and so that we can meet and understand the needs of everyone, and having more of these discussions.
Absolutely. And I think that for me, that goes back to kind of a lifetime belief that I have in one of the things we need more of is radical vulnerability. And I think that's the place where we could have a shift with healthcare professionals before the structures are put in place for supports, because healthcare professionals are taught to not be vulnerable, right? They're taught to come to it as the person who has the power, who has the training, and vulnerability is seen as a weakness. Well, that's a very, very complicated stance to take when you're treating vulnerable people. It's very complicated to walk into a room and say vulnerability is bad, and now I will help you, vulnerable person, right? Like that doesn't, that is not set up for success for anyone. So what we need more of right now, like in this immediate moment, I think, is we need more honesty and we need more vulnerability from both sides. Although I would say more from the healthcare professionals, because honestly, the system sets up the patients or the people who need care in a vulnerable situation. We need the healthcare professionals to meet us in a vulnerable way to say, you know, and it doesn't mean like, it's not like your patient is your therapist all of a sudden. We're not doing that. That's not what we're looking at, but meeting us in our humanity, in our shared humanity, and allowing that to be an understanding of strength rather than an understanding of weakness. And when we do that, we're going to start being able to identify where we can put shifts into the system that's going to support everyone.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think this is really important. Radical vulnerability. Yeah. And there is so much more that we can say about that. And I feel that sometimes this involves also people working on themselves, and see why they don't want to be open their heart and be vulnerable, because for some people it's quite triggering and difficult, and yeah, but very important when we want to meet the other.
And we can start with baby steps. You know, it's nobody learns to run right away. When a toddler is learning to walk, they fall on their butt a whole lot of times, and they get up and they do it again, and that's okay. It doesn't need to. We don't need to start out out of the gate just on a full run. Like, oh, I've never shared anything about my life before, but here's my entire life story. That's not gonna feel good. You're gonna walk away with a vulnerability hangover, and you're never gonna want to do it again, right? We can start with little baby steps, and I think that's the direction we need to move in.
Yeah. And on another topic, but I feel this is very linked with what we are talking. So about, I would love to ask you a few questions about inclusion. And first of all, do you say inclusion or inclusivity? And inclusivity is an English term or not?
I think you could say both. I mean, I think that inclusivity is the practice of inclusion. Yeah. So I think that you could do both, right? Yeah.
And is inclusion a good word to use, or do you usually use another word?
I would use the word inclusion. I am sure, because of the culture that we live in, there is someone out there who doesn't like the word inclusion and has a better term. For me right now, I don't have a better term.
Yeah, but to understand each other, I think.
I think we're good to start there. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is a topic that really interests me because I'm ignorant about it. Well, I know what I know because of what I read, and because, you know, I read your posts, and I follow some of the transgender community, because I love to understand their point of view, and also I don't want to be like not including them. In my experience as a midwife, I think twice looked after transgender women, and And then from there, I asked myself, oh, I wasn't ready. I mean, ready in terms on how to communicate, how to address them or him or her. And so my question is, first, like, how can we be more inclusive, first of all, and how can we become aware of, I'm talking about gender here, but I guess in every also in different way, how can we be inclusive? For example, I give you a really basic example. I have a website and I always talk about women because I'm a midwife, and women have no at the moment even like transgender people might get pregnant. So how can I include not only women but people in general, and yeah, including women, including also non-women or other terms that can be used? How can I do that? And this is just really a basic example. Where do we start?
Totally. Well, I mean, I think, okay, so I think the first place to start on a one-on-one basis, and this was introduced to me probably 15 years ago, maybe closer to 20 years ago now. I did a young adult leadership program, and it was an amazing program, and I was there in a community with other young adults, and we were doing multiple different kinds of training, and we were doing it with somebody, one of the community members was trans. And we very quickly started a practice where everyone in the room, the first thing we did, and this was really important, as at the time I identified as cis. At this point, I identify kind of gender fluid, gender queer. Depending on the day, the feeling, it changes. But I feel like I don't fit quite in the gender binary that I once understood myself fitting in. But at the time, I was identifying as cis. And one of the things that became really clear as a beautiful practice was when we were introducing ourselves to someone new. And we would do this often because we've been like group workshops consistently. We'd say, hi, my name is, and my pronouns are. And we would always start with somebody who was cis instead of the trans individual in the room. It was never required of the trans individual in the room to identify themselves as their pronouns first. So it was just a practice. Hi, my name is Erin, and I go by she and her. Now I would say, hi, my name is Erin, I go by she, they. And then what that does is it sets up a practice for everyone. It normalizes the conversation. My pronouns are. The other thing that I would do now on a very practical level in the life of the Zoom world 20 years later is I would put my pronouns next to my name. And that's just as part of my name on Zoom, I have my pronouns. And that's never changes. And so what that means is that means that no matter what, I'm showing up and I am identifying my pronouns in a room as part of my identification. Now because I'm like, I identify in the gender queer identity, I'm no longer that cis individual who's doing that practice, but it's still an important practice to me. So I think those are really like basic things, but really can make a huge difference, because if what you're doing is you're saying, hi, my name is, and my pronouns are, then what you're doing is you're signaling to anyone in that room, I see you. I am at least trying. At the very least, I am aware and I'm trying. And at best, I'm a very safe person, right? So you're all automatic, and you're inviting other people to come in and meet you in that place. Come in and meet me here, where we identify gender as something that we are openly talking about, openly acknowledging. And when you meet someone and you're not sure about their pronouns, say, hi, my name is, and my pronouns are, what are yours? Because there are very few people who are going to be offended by that. If anything, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, thanks. And you don't have to be like, by the way, I go by. I mean, I have people that I know that sell pins that say my pronouns are, just so that they don't have to be constantly leading with it and they don't have to be constantly misgendered. So I think those are a couple like very basic things, but I think that on a larger scale, we need to really think about how we gender language in general. How when we talk about, for example, as a midwife, and this is a complicated place because historically it's been women that have been identified as midwives community, but really you're servicing women and people with wombs. So that now also includes men, right? Or sometimes non-binary people. And so there's a much larger community. And so in that sort of situation, on my website, perhaps I would make sure that I'm saying, you know, women, men, or humans with wombs, and non-binary people, you know, like I'm explicitly naming that these are all the people that I'm serving, because when someone who is not in the gender binary is coming across offerings of any kind, one of the things that they're going to start doing is they're going to be trying to see, is this a safe place for me?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of women's spaces that are not safe because they're not actually honoring the trans experience or the non-binary experience as a valid one. So there's already a feeling of like, I'm not sure this is for me. And unless it's explicitly stated and explicitly shown, I'm going to assume that I don't fit properly. Right now, I'm still someone who I know that I fit in women's spaces, and I'm non-binary and I'm genderqueer. I know that I can be in both places and I can feel good most of the time, unless they're actually transphobic, and then I'm like out the door. But I think there are other people who don't feel that, who need that more explicit permission and that more explicit naming. And I think the other piece is to really understand that it's becoming, how do I want to say, what do I want to say about this? We're in a generation right now where we're still trying to catch up, where we're still trying to figure out how to move forward. The next generation coming is going to have a very different lived experience, because there are children, mine included, who have identified their gender at a very young age. So kids become aware of gender. Their first understanding of gender is between 3 and 5 years old, right? So there are kids, including my own, who at between 3 and 5 said, I'm a different gender than the body than what you've identified, than my body is showing you. And they've said, I'm this gender. I'm transgender, I'm non-binary, you know, and then as parents, you're raising a child to be themselves all of their lives. And what's going to happen is we're going to have a new generation of kids who are allowed to be their true gender from childhood on. And so it's up to us as the current adults to make sure that the situations and the communities that we're setting up and we're putting out there are going to be ready for these children when they get there. That gives us, like, you know, some of those kids are already there, but that gives us at max at this point, if you're talking about a kid born today, you know, 20-ish years or less before we need to have those spaces ready to accept those people without question. So how do we transform them now so that we can get as comfortable as we can, so that when they show up, they're able to do all those things without having to fight those battles to be included in the first place?
And how do you support those kids that not have that awareness and know, like, because I also see, not in all community, but in some like culture, like my culture in Italy, lots of taboo, lots of shame, and lots of suppression. And so I wonder, for parents that are new to this world, how can they support their family and their children to be authentic and to really experience what they experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing is to really trust kids and
Mm.
trust what they're telling you. And if your kiddo says, I'm not the gender you're telling me I am, then you trust them.
Mm.
And then what you do, and like for a little while, so when my daughter first came out, we would check in at the very beginning. We were checking in every day. Like, do you want us to use girl pronouns today? Good. Yes. Okay, cool. We'll do that. Every single day it was like, is that just wanting to make sure, because we were aware that sometimes when kids are exploring a non-binary identity, they may change their pronouns every day. So they may need you to check in with them every single day. What are the pronouns that you feel most aligned with today? What works for you today? And for you to shift. And it's practice. There's practice involved. So, I mean, one really practical thing you can do if you have trans or non-binary humans in your life that you're trying to support, or someone who's just come out, have loving conversations about them with other people who love them, practicing their new pronouns, so that when you come into conversation with them, you're not stumbling, you're not trying to say them for the first time. Because that's where and people will make mistakes, and we understand that. Everyone understands that. But as long as you're trying, that makes a big difference. That's a big shift. And so with kids, it's identifying, like, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? Trusting them, taking them at their word. And then there's a lot of advocacy. So, like, behind the scenes with my kiddo, up until your kid is a adult age, their medical records still say their birth sex on it, right? Their birth gender. And usually we'll also have what we call the dead name. So the dead name is the name given at birth.
Yeah.
And so what you need to do as a parent ally or advocate, anytime you're having a conversation with anyone who has a file on your child, you're saying, you're stepping out of the room or making sure your kiddo's not there, and you're saying, hey, I just want to make sure that your records reflect my child goes by these pronouns. This is the name to use. This needs to be highlighted in your files so that you're not misusing them, like misgendering them accidentally. Thank you so much. And I've done that now. I do that even knowing I have corrected files at the pediatrician's office, at the specialist's office, in their school, whatever. I still check before they're going to see my kiddo. Hey, I just want to make sure you have the right pronouns on file, because it's important for me that I'm doing everything I can to support my kid in not being misgendered or dead named. Now, if it happens, I've also coached my kiddo to be able to say, no, I go by, no, my pronouns are, or no, my name is, and have them say that. Or beforehand, if I'm there with them, say, if they use the wrong pronouns, do you want mommy to correct it? And then they get to decide. Yes, you want mommy to correct it? Cool. I'm going to do that for you then. And I think that one of the really hard things for a lot of parents is that they haven't considered this whole world. There are a lot of parents out there. Like, I was really, in a lot of ways, really lucky, because I had already been very deeply embedded in how do I be an advocate for someone who's trans, for someone who's non-binary? How do I show up and be that person? So when my kiddo came out, I was like, okay, we're going to do this. Right on. But there's a lot of conversations with family members who had never really done any deep emotional work around it, had a lot of beliefs that they didn't even realize they had until it happened. Some of them worked really hard at the very beginning to get on board as quickly as they could, and some of them took a lot longer. And so there are hard conversations, and it can be very difficult for parents because when they're trying to get their heads around something, they're still needing to show up as an advocate, and they're still needing to show up as an ally. And that's a really complicated place to be. And so it's really important that those parents go and find themselves support, like ASAP. Get yourself some parent support as soon as you possibly can, so that you have a safe place to go. You can practice, you can talk about your concerns, you can talk about your questions that are coming up. But big part of inclusion, a really big part of inclusion, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about gender or if we're talking about disability, if we're talking about health, a big part of inclusion is doing your own personal work around the stuff that comes up. Because if you haven't done the personal work around the stuff that comes up, you're accidentally going to step on people's toes. You're accidentally going to hurt someone, even if you have the best intentions. So you have to go through the, like, what are the beliefs that I have around what makes a person a woman, or what makes a person a man, or what makes a person disabled, what makes a person healthy. Any of those questions are important for us to really start grappling with on a deeper level than what we've been told by society. Because what we know now is society, the way society is set up, it's not set up to support those people on the liminal edges. And if we want it to change, it's up to us to change first. Yeah. And then society will follow. Society is not going to change and then we're going to catch up. That's not how it works, right? We're going to have to be those people at the front lines saying, sorry, you know what, every single intake form that we have for the maternity ward, for example, should have pronouns at the very top, and it should have a place for preferred name, and that should be highlighted if it's not already there. Those should be there, and if they're not there, then that's a problem. We need to make sure that every, whatever it is, we need to be able to push those edges so that it's not always on the person who's on the liminal edges themselves doing the advocacy, because usually they have to fight those battles every single time they turn around, and they don't have the energy for it. To find someone who's willing to fight with them is massive.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and this conversation. And hearing you talking about that, I feel like a big, really key, essential part of, inclusion is safety, and feeling safe, like from both sides, like feeling if I have a conversation or if I support someone, then feeling safe myself and do my own work, but also establish that safety in that conversation, work, or whatever, where you are, hospital, one-to-one appointment, but really be able to establish the conversation in safety. And that means seeing the other for who they are, in that authenticity, and with their needs, their qualities, who they are totally. Do you have anything to add about safety?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that we need to remember around safety is that we all need and deserve our own safe spaces. So when there's a challenge for you, whether that's someone has just come out and now you need to change their name that they go by in your mind and the pronouns, and you need to be able to make that shift, or whether you need to process loss of health privilege, or your own or someone knowing someone in your life that you can go to who can hold space for you to work through some of the stuff. And if you don't have someone in your life to do that, the second best thing to do is to take up a writing practice. Start writing, because you can be your own safe place if you're writing. Writing gives you a mirror for being able to see yourself more clearly. That's why we need the safe spaces, right? What happens when we're in a safe place is we see ourselves more clearly and we see the other that we're with more clearly. And so if you don't have a person who can do that with you, write it down, because you'll see yourself more clearly through that process, and it will help you see, oh, this is a place where I do actually need professional support around this thing to shift my mindset, or I need to understand this more and I need to now do some more research in this place, or wow, there's a place I need to do some grief work. That's that belief that I had around what health really is. I didn't realize I was holding this hurt from so long ago about the time when I lost my ability to do this thing. And the way that I was treated at the time has impacted the way I've been treating others in the process. So now I'm responsible for doing the grief work and the healing around that previous experience so that I can come to this more clearly. I think that that's a big part that our culture doesn't talk about, our world in general, because there's lots of cultures. I mean, even you and I are talking across cultures right now. But we don't in general do a very good job of honoring grief and honoring the process of really allowing ourselves to let certain things go and let new things come into being. And that's a place where if we can't do that, we aren't going to be able to step into the newness, into the more inclusive spaces, into the more vulnerable spaces, all of those things. It requires us to be able to sit with the hard stuff, including grief. And if we don't have places where we can sit with the hard stuff, then we're up a creek without a paddle in a lot of ways. And I mean, I think the other thing I want to say about safety is I want to be really, really clear for any listeners who haven't had these situations before. The person that you're trying to hold safe space for is not the person that you need to have safe space with for yourself. They're two separate places.
Yeah.
So you hold safe space for one person and you go somewhere else for your own safe space. So one of the things that sometimes happens is when people see these things come into being, right? This situation unfolds around them and they suddenly are having to deal with this situation, whatever the situation is. And they suddenly see, oh my gosh, I've been so hurt. I didn't realize, and I hurt you because I've been so hurt. But let me tell you, person of a vulnerable situation, all about the ways in which I've hurt, because I'm feeling badly that I hurt you as well. So I need to process my own hurt and my own feelings now so I can feel better. So not put a pin in it, say like, self, I love you. I see you. You need some attention. This is not the moment. I'm going to put a pin in it. I'm going to go and find a safe person after this so I can do my processing. Because a lot of people who live with being on those liminal edges find that they have to do a lot of extra emotional labor. And some of that is dealing with the emotional labor of supporting other people in their feelings about how that person is on the liminal edge. Me as a disabled person, I have to hold space for people who have feelings about the fact that I'm disabled. And that's okay. I can do it to a certain extent, but it takes a lot of effort for me to be able to show up and hold space for someone else to have feelings about my own abilities. It would be much preferable to me if they could go have their feelings somewhere else and have their process somewhere else around my abilities or my lack thereof, and then come to me and say, how can I show up? How can I support you? Yeah. And that goes for gender, that goes for disability, that goes for health, right? We need to make sure that we're not, so there's a care circle sort of idea that I've thought a lot about since my own kiddo was diagnosed with my same cancer that I had growing up. And it's, at the very center is the patient or the person in question. The next level is the immediate family or the closest friends. The next circle out is the extended family. or the other friends, and then there's the acquaintances, then there's the wider community, right? So these circles go out. Care, the care that is offered should always go inward, and the request for care should always go outward. So the person in the center can ask care from anybody from out there, but the immediate family doesn't go into the center to get their care. The extended family doesn't go to the immediate family for care. They go to the community. Right? The community doesn't go to the extended family or the immediate family for care. They go farther out. It's important to make sure we're not putting more burdens on the care circles than already are present. And I think that we haven't quite figured that out as a society, but it's a necessary part of making enough space, of creating safe space for us to do the hard work of actually creating inclusion in all of the ways that we need to do inclusion.
Yeah, beautiful. I have so many other things that I would like to add and ask and examples, because it's such a conversation that we need to have in so many different layers, topics. Yeah. So thank you for start this conversation. I know that you started already, and you are passionate and dedicated about all these topics. So I just want to say thank you to lead by example and to inspire us. Like, definitely you inspired me to know more about this topic, because I didn't know about health privilege. I didn't know, I had an understanding, but also I want to say, as white, we take many things for granted. And so I didn't know, as white, that, I'm healthy. I don't have to access the hospital often. I don't go to the GP often because I'm healthy. And so I don't think about actually what other people can, the struggles and the good things and the bad things. And and I think, we need to have more discussions around that. So, because as you said, to go through, to meet each other, maybe those ones who have health privilege and are in the higher scale. I know there is no scale, but maybe, lowering and understand, have more understanding, have more that vulnerability. So thank you. I don't know if you want to say the last message, anything that you would like to share as a final conclusion message.
Yeah, I do have one last thing to share, because it was something that was actually, we were talking about this morning, my partner and I, because we were talking about the different levels of privilege, how sometimes we get worried about talking about what we know or what we experience, because we say, well, I have more privilege than the other person, so maybe I shouldn't say anything, or I don't know exactly the best way to go about it. And so there's this struggle of how do I be sensitive? How do I show up? How do we join in community together? How do we create community knowing that we have these different levels of privilege? Say, for example, we'll just talk about health privilege for the moment. How do we create a community knowing that we are at different levels of health privilege, but that we all have this shared experience of it's a mutable thing, it's a changeable thing. We're going to have this different experience depending on what happens to us in our lifetime. And my partner said, well, it's a little bit like someone who is working a middle class or a working job, like a working class job, who sees a billionaire and says, I could be that. And it's yeah, you could be that billionaire, but you're actually closer to that homeless person who doesn't have a job, who's unemployed and doesn't have a home. So yes, it's possible that there is very few people in the world who are the 1% in privilege in all the ways. More of us are together down in the other rest, the 1% is way up here. The rest of us are actually together a lot closer than we think we are. We're actually a lot closer to sharing similar things than we think we are. Yes, we need to acknowledge our differences. Yes, we need to be sensitive to our differences. Yes, we need to learn as much as we can so that we can tread gently with each other's hearts and souls, because that is necessary and important. But it's also really important for us as humans at this point to understand that we're a lot closer to one another than we are separate. So that one person who has perfect health, who's never going to have anything that happens to them, who never has a surgery, who doesn't really ever go to the doctor, who doesn't have any health issues, whatever, that's maybe 1% of the planet, maybe, if that. The rest of us are here experiencing some level of changing health privilege. And so it's really important that we start understanding that we're in this together, even if our privilege looks different at different times. And that's true kind of no matter I'm not going to speak for like every type of diversity out there, but I really think that we need to, especially because I'm a white person, that would be really, really inappropriate for me to do that. But we really need to, at least with health privilege and able privilege, understand that we're closer than we think we are. And we are able to show up. If we can show up with love, if we can show up with vulnerability, if we can show up with humanity and making space for voices to be heard, we're going to do a lot more good than we think we're capable of doing right now. Right now, we're still in the place where we think we're really far apart. We're not that far apart. So if we come a little closer to one another and we start talking a little more honestly about our experiences, we're going to find that we can do the transformation that our society really needs us to do, to create those safe spaces that are inclusive and that are honoring our true authentic selves where we are, and allowing for all of us. A big part of what I'm really passionate about right now is, how do we get the support that we need? No matter who it is, how do we get the support that we need? We need to create a world that is supportive to each one of us. And the more we know that we are in it together, the easier it's going to be to create those networks of support.
Beautiful. What you just said, I was like, oh yeah. My heart sank. I was like, yeah, it's so, I feel like so safe that we are all in this together. That we are not like, we are different, but not that different. And we belong to the same family. And once we recognize that, actually, yeah, good things can happen.
It's just about making space to hear each other. So thank you for making space to hear me today. I'm really, really grateful. This was amazing.
Thank you. I love this conversation. And I think I will invite you in the future for more talks.
Great. I'm excited. This is amazing. I really love chatting with you. It fuels something in my heart to know that we can have these conversations.
Yeah.
Because we haven't been able to have these conversations as a society. And it's really exciting that we're getting there. That we can do.
I just want to say that my eyes are wet with the things that you just said. The fact that, it doesn't matter if you don't go to the GP often. Like, we are in the same boat. And I feel like, oh yeah, we are. I don't need to put pressure on myself or numb myself. I can actually show up in my community and be vulnerable and do that. Start doing that. The others will do that. I will support the others. The others will support me. Thank you.
This was wonderful.